All right, welcome to a very, very special episode of the Card Diary by Hobbyist Thompson. I'm your host, Denny Cards. I know I say every episode is special when I have a guest, but it's true. I love having guests. And the thing about this one, it is the first time ever. It only took me over a year of this podcast to finally realize with my StreamYard subscription, I should try to have more than one guest on at the same time. And today we have a very special lineup of guests. We have three individuals who I've gotten to meet at card shows in the last 6 weeks. Just this crazy whirlwind tour and tornado of fun at card shows. And so I would love for each guest to introduce themselves. And I'm going to do my absolute best to take a back seat for this hour conversation. But I've also never done this before. So I will try to go on mute, but if I do end up talking too much, which I already have, just give me a sign. Just let me know, guys. So um, to do your introductions, I would like for you guys to kind of give us like a 2-minute intro. Please let the audience know your name, your Instagram handle, or however you want to be, your socials, where in the country you're located. Is the hobby a full-time gig or a side hustle? And then finally, as a fun little icebreaker, could you please share your favorite hotel and airline since all of you do so much traveling? And we can start with Zach, then we'll go to Gavin and then Rob.
Perfect. Cool. Well, Denny, thank you for having me on, and Rob and Gavin. It's great to meet you because we actually haven't met. So this is fun to be able to chat with you guys. My name is Zach Nygett. I'm located outside of Denver in Colorado. Grew up originally outside of Chicago. My IG handles are collector_creative. I have started a new business to offer creative services to those in the hobby who need that. I had my own design development business for about 15 years. I also worked and had the opportunity to work with Jeff Wilson at Sports Card Investor, where I was their senior product manager, helped turn around Market Movers app, which is kicking butt now. So that was really cool and fun. So hobby is mostly a full-time gig. I also do tech consulting as well, but I have original card art that I've been producing that I'm really excited about. I do have my own podcast, Hobby Hustle. So if you guys haven't checked it out, please do. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all of it. Just search Hobby Hustle and it'll pop up. I'm trying to remember all your questions, Denny, so I can hit them all. The airline is, I'm a Southwest guy. I have been for a long time, so that's pretty easy for me. I've got lots of points that take good care of me. And as far as hotels, I'm a Bonvoy guy. So anywhere Marriott Bonvoy stuff is, that's what I use. So let me know if I missed something, Denny, but I think I touched all the bases for you.
You knocked it out of the park. You hit every single point and question. You've set the bar high, but I know Gavin and Rob are going to do great as well. So thank you, and thank you for being on here. And Gavin, you're next.
Hey, so I'm Gavin. I'm from Long Island, New York. I'm definitely an East Coast guy. I travel to a lot of the East Coast shows. I keep it pretty local. I don't travel as much as maybe Rob and Zach do. I only flew a handful of times. Each time I did take American Airlines, though. I'm a big fan of them for planes, as you can say. I'm not a big fan of planes. I'm definitely more of a train and car guy. Like, I went to the National in Ohio. I actually drove 9 hours from Long Island. But I went to Dallas recently, and that was a plane there and back, so it went pretty smooth though. Hotels, I'm probably gonna go the same as Zach. I like Marriott a lot. I think it's a really good hotel. I mean, I stay in hotels almost every weekend as I do travel the East Coast a lot, so that's definitely for me. I'm only a couple years out of high school, so I'm definitely a little bit younger than everybody here. So I guess you could say cards is my full time gig. I trade stocks every day, not nearly as good as that as the cards. Cards definitely I would consider my full time gig. I do love it. I've been collecting since I was 12 years old, so almost eight years now. I've been doing it. So, and I've been setting up at shows since I was like 14. So I've been doing that like 5, 6 years. So I've been doing that quite a bit too. I definitely love setting up more than walking, but walking's a lot of fun too. I walk probably more than setting up, even though I like setting up more. But yeah, that's about it for me. I mean, I'm sure we have a lot of subject to cover within this next hour. I'd like to pass this on to Rob for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gavin. Rob, you're next.
Thanks, Denny. Thanks, Gavin. I'm Rob Coots. I've been full-time in the space for, I would say, for just over 2 years at this point. I think I started full-time around the middle of 2022. I used to work previously in the financial services sector, mainly dealing with major large-scale banks, domestically and internationally, dealing with like risk management. Let's see. My Instagram's Collector's Choice Cards. On Facebook, you'll find me under Robert Harold. But primarily, I do shows and social media in terms of how I network my buying, selling, and trading of singles. When I came back into the card space, I was doing it part time. Like I was mainly doing it for fun while doing my old job, and I was ripping single boxes and cases back in 2017 through 2019, and then I started to see the surge in case and wax pricing. So then I kind of pivoted from there once I saw the prices of boxes basically go through the roof, and the cost of grading. So then I moved into the singles game in 2019, and then transitioned fully to work in the card space about 2 years ago. Um, in terms of in terms of traveling, like Gavin mentioned, I do shows. I'm based in Connecticut, so not too far from Gavin. I see him at a lot of shows throughout the Northeast region, which I enjoy. We actually just struck a deal a few days ago in our last show.
Good deal.
In Philly, so it was fair for both sides for sure. But uh, yeah, mainly I do shows regionally. I also do some local shows throughout Connecticut. I do some shows regionally throughout the Northeast, and then I go all over the country. All the different large scale shows that Denny's going to mention shortly. But yeah, in terms of hotels, very similar to you guys. In my old job, I used to stay in hotels up to 300 nights a year. So um, I'm a big Bonvoy guy. I've always been pretty much Marriott, and then once Starwood and Marriott had the merger, it was kind of ideal to stay there. In terms of airlines, I mean, it kind of varies. Being in the Northeast now, there's a lot of different airports I kind of navigate out of. Being in Connecticut, so I kind of have to sometimes pivot from there. But I used to always be a big American guy. I used to live in Dallas, so like that's obviously their hub. But I honestly, like most of the airlines, unless you're flying the high skies of Spirit, you usually have a pretty consistent travel experience, from what I've found at least. So, thanks for having us on, Denny.
Absolutely. I love bringing people together, but it seems like definitely Gavin and Rob, you guys have already been making deals and know of each other. I know when I reached out to each of you individually, I didn't say who was all going to be on this at that time, but I started the group, and I'm so glad to just bring people together, and that's what I love doing in the hobby. So this episode is not sponsored by Marriott Bonvoy. But it's always available if they want to. But no, it's great that you guys like the Marriott Bonvoy and all that. And no shout outs to any airlines other than I recently picked up on my trip to Culture Collision and back, 2 Delta plane cards. And I just would love it if these other airlines did it too. It would just be such a cool thing. But we're not here to talk about that. I just wanted to give a little icebreaker, kind of humanize you guys to the audience. So thank you for being here. When I asked each of you, when I asked the whole Instagram public, like, would you like to come on and talk about it? More than the three of you asked to be on this, but and I won't go into who I didn't choose and all that, but I wanted each of you specifically for what I thought you could bring to the table, and so let's dive right into it. So the first question I have, and before I ask this question, and then I will go on mute. Rob, my understanding is you've been we're talking about the big shows, right? Like not the local shows, but you have been to the national. You've been to Fanatics Fest, which is where I met you for the first time. I met you also again at Culture Collision, and you also went to Philly. Am I missing any shows from the last like 2 months, 3 months that you've been to, the bigger regional shows?
I would say those are probably the larger scale ones. Dallas. I did skip Burbank just because I did go last year. It's a very long hike for me all the way from the East Coast,
Yeah.
from the Northeast region, especially with you having to fly, most flights being into LAX, and then you having to get over from LAX over to Ontario.
Right.
But in general, yeah, that's Burbank's really the only larger scale one that I did miss this circle.
Got it.
Missing the cycle just because of the amount of shows within that short time period, for sure.
And that is Ontario, California. I definitely made a mistake when I was looking at plane ticket prices, looking at Ontario, Canada. Rob, I'm sorry, Zach. How about you? I know National, Burbank, Culture Collision, and Culture Collision was where I met you. Am I missing any of the bigger regional shows?
No, I think that's all of them, man. It's all such a blur. But yeah, no, and I don't set up typically as much. I typically go there to walk, and I just enjoy the camaraderie too, Denny. So it's mostly networking,
Yes.
seeing people, and obviously it's about the cards. But at this point, I'm not a card snob in any sort of way. I'm very picky, so it's like I really just enjoy hanging out and seeing all the people that get to come together.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and you showed me
But
those
I
Dennis
will rep
Rodman.
my local Denver card show, man. I'm actually going to set up with my son in a couple weeks, so I'm excited about that. That'll be fun.
Very cool.
Nice.
Very
Yeah.
cool. Gavin, National, East Coast National, Dallas, and Philly.
Yeah.
Am I missing any?
Those were the main big ones I've hit up. Obviously, I'm from Long Island, Zach's from Denver, Rob's from Connecticut, so there's a lot of local shows we do that aren't as big, maybe 75 tables, 60 tables, maybe 100 tables, smaller shows. I think the East Coast National is definitely a big one for me, considering I had a whole booth. I had like 8 showcases that show. It was really
Yeah.
good. Philly was really good. I was walking around. Rob had it set up. Like he said, we struck a deal. It was a pretty good show there. Dallas, I was walking around. I'm not sure. Rob, were you set up at Dallas?
Yes. So I was at Dallas for the first weekend of September. Yep.
Yeah, so Dallas, I think, was a really good show. That was arguably, other than the National, I think Dallas was arguably the best one out of the bunch, especially for just striking deals. I think all the shows had one thing in common the past 2 months. I would put the East Coast National, Philly, and Dallas all in the same thing. Like, I feel like the foot traffic was a little bit slower. You guys can correct me on that.
Okay. So yeah, no, absolutely. Let's definitely talk about these shows, but I did want to kind of like my next kind of big question, because I really wanted to get the elephant in the room out of the way, and that is Fanatics Fest, because I am not sure if it's fair or reasonable for us to kind of clump that into the discussion, because I think I'm going to call this episode like Regional Card Show Roundup. But that weekend in middle of August, I met Rob, Collector's Choice Cards. Zach wasn't there, and Gavin, you made the decision to be at East Coast National. So I just wanted to know. I guess maybe I'll start with Gavin talking about his decision to go with East Coast National versus Fanatics Fest, but and Rob too, vice versa. But it in doing so, in talking about your decision to go where you did, is it even fair for us to consider on the same plane as these other regional shows that I just mentioned, or should it be considered its own beast?
For Fanatics Fest, I didn't attend exactly, so I can't talk too much into depth about it. I heard it was a very good show. Obviously, from seeing the videos, they had a lot of celebrities there, a lot of tables, I believe. I'm sure there was deals to be made there. I'm sure it was probably the better of the two shows, honestly. The reason for me picking East Coast National is because with the promoter, Jimmy Ryan, you guys may have heard of him. I have a very close relationship with him. I've known him since I was a little kid, and I've been setting up at his shows for years. So, of course, I was going to choose his show over any show pretty much. I always pick his shows. Also, for me, I believe for a whole booth at Fanatics Fest, I believe it was 3,000 plus. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. That's what I've heard. Where East Coast National, I think it was only $600, which is a very big difference for me. Another thing for me, I'm from Long Island, and when I tell people I'm from New York, people are like, "Oh, the city, the city." I'm like an hour and a half away from the city, and I'm not a big fan of the city. Like I like visiting the city, love it. Would I want to be there for days? Probably not. So for me, it was a very easy decision to go to the East Coast National for my 3 points that I made. So it was an easy decision for me. But for other people, I could totally see why they would want to go to Fanatics Fest, like Rob did. Yeah, that's it for me. For that.
Go. I wanted to stay on mute. I'm like laughing while on mute because I totally know what you mean. Just the Long Island and the city and all that, it's very different. Like the reason I even went to, and I mentioned this in my past episode, but which hasn't released yet. But I talked about how the reason I even went up to East Coast National was because my friend who I was staying with was just 2 Metro North stops away. So I was like, I'm already up here. let me just drop in and see what it's like. So I won't go into my experiences because people will either have listened to it or hope they do listen to it, and you guys don't know anything about it because I recorded it last night. But I would like to turn it over to Rob to talk about his decision, and is it fair to even consider Fanatics Fest when talking about these regional card shows?
Thanks, Denny and Gavin. Your point about the cost perspective, that was definitely spot on. As someone who's done a lot of shows, that's also from the region, that does a lot of shows in the Northeast. I've done JPRS's shows throughout Westchester when they have it there in New York, and then they also have the Long Island show at Hofstra. I've done both of those shows before with Gavin as well. And if Fanatics wasn't that weekend and there wasn't an overlap on another large circuit show, I definitely would have been there for sure. It's definitely a reputable show for a Northeast dealer and attendee. But kind of touching on the differences between Fanatics and JPRS's show for the East Coast National, I would say they're kind of very different.
Very.
I think they each bring their own benefits, and I think they each bring their own type of clientele. I think having Fanatics within such a close proximity on that same weekend, especially being it for the first time at such a venue like the Javits Center in Manhattan, I think in terms of accessibility for travelers, I think people that are flying in or people that are driving in from certain areas of the Northeast or taking even public transit, I think it's a lot easier accessible than maybe going into Long Island. And I think, but it really just depends on, I think they're two different beasts, right? Are you going to the East Coast National because you have kind of an ambition to maybe be one of the fewer buyers in the room because people are kind of pivoting to going over to the Fanatic show? It's a larger scale show. You have celebrities. It's at a large top tier venue. It's at, you've got some of the best dealers in the country. You've got some of the best breakers you've got basically the best of the best that's going to be at the National in terms of modern and vintage sports cards are going to be at Fanatics. And it's no knock on anyone that did East Coast National. I think the thing is, it depends on what your targets are, right? Like you have to look at kind of the differences between each of the two shows. East Coast National, JPRS has had strong suited shows for a long time, right? Fanatics is the new player in the game, but obviously
Gotta check out the new player.
they're a big player, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to blow it out on the first show. They're going to have some of the biggest names. Brady walked by my table before I even set up my booth. Literally, Michael Rubin stopped by to say hello to each of the different dealers on the show floor. So, I mean, the fact of that matter, it's like clearly they're trying to make a statement, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with making a statement, but it doesn't mean that one show is no good and the other one's lights out. Listen, Fanatics was a great show. I think from every angle, it was a great show in terms of getting visibility as a dealer, meeting athletes and celebrities, striking deals from a buy and sell and trade side. The venue was top tier. The location was top tier. Obviously, the Javits Center, that's premier venue in Manhattan for conventions. But also JPRS puts on great shows too. So I don't think comparing one to the other in terms of those tier shows is very comparing apples to apples. I think the thing is, the way you'll look at it is you have to look at kind of what your priorities are, how much money you want to invest, what type of tier cards you're putting out. See, for me specifically, a booth with 10 showcases was $3,600. So like, unless you're putting out quality inventory or are very motivated to move cards, the cost perspective, once you incorporate hotels, meals, transportation, everything, you're probably looking at
$5,000 trip.
$6,000. So I mean, for most people, unless you're being ambitious and moving cards and not worried about getting every cent on every deal, it may not be the show for you. That's the way I looked at it. I tried to be as agile as possible, create fair deals for both sides, not focused on every single cent, but getting heavy volume in and out, and just basically keeping it moving. And that's kind of for the larger scale shows where you have heavy incorporated costs. That's kind of how I've always focused on doing it, for sure.
Thank you so much for that perspective, Rob. And I do want to get Zach's take, even though he wasn't at either of those shows. I just want to get his take on, what he thinks about kind of, is it fair to have Fanatics Fest clumped in with these other regional shows when we're talking about the show circuit? Because there was like so much of a non-card show component to Fanatics Fest. But before I say that, two things. One, I want to caveat this whole conversation saying no one, at least with me, and I think with all of you either, no one's paid us or asked us to talk about them or hype them up. Gavin clearly has a relationship with JP or Jimmy Ryan, I'm sorry, and from like a business, like from you said you knew him since you were a kid, right? And so you're gonna have fond, like a good relationship. Having said that, the one caveat I do want to kind of like say to all of you, I think all of you already know this, but then also to the viewership is, Culture Collision. I was part of their social media content creation team, like a media ambassador and all that stuff. But that's why for this particular episode, I don't want to inject too much of my own opinion. I want all of you to speak, but I did want to kind of, just say that just for full transparency. The second thing I wanted to say was I had to look it up because I heard of JPRS. I didn't know what it stood for, but apparently it's JP's Sports and Rock Solid Promotions.
Mhm.
I just wanted to say that because some people listening might be like, what is this whole JPRS thing? So they are a promotion team, or it seems like, and so
It's a family business. They do have a team, though. Yes.
Yeah. No, so that's awesome. So I just wanted to kind of clear that. So, and it seems like they say that their event locations are Westchester County Center and Hofstra.
They do a local show at Plainview. I mean, just to get this clear, like I'm not part of their team at all, and
Yeah.
I do think there are way better shows in the United States than their shows. I'm just saying, like from a local standpoint, if you're in the New York area or even the New Jersey, Connecticut area, I think their shows are definitely. I've always been loyal to them. I think they're worth a good check out.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, Zach, is it fair to clump Fanatics Fest with these other regional shows?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting take. I don't think this one that just happened necessarily is. I think like Rob touched on it, I didn't go. Part of that was A, it's a busy show schedule, and B, it was cost prohibitive for me, so I'm sort of the opposite. Granted, I'm more in the middle of the country, but after travel, hotels, everything else, it was just going to be way too expensive for it to make sense for me. But everyone I talked to said it was an amazing event. The celebrities and the experiences that they were able to provide. And I think that that's a big differentiator, is that show specific was an experience show, right? As you said, Rob, like Fanatics came to impress. They wanted to make a statement. They wanted to blow it out of the water. Obviously, being in New York, you've got a ton of celebrities that are either located there or travel there often. So that's an easy sell for Rubin to, go through his Rolodex and say, hey, why don't you stop by? So I think that trying to compare that specific show to these other shows is not apples to apples. However, with that said, I do know that the show coming up in November in Orlando is still a Fanatics Fest show, but that is a card show. Not to say that they won't have celebrities and they won't have some people. It's not going to be at the scale of what New York was. And I do think that's going to be a much more interesting experience. And comparing that to some of these other larger shows, I think will be more apples to apples. I know EJ's been really focused on bringing in a lot of the best vendors in the country. I think it's a bigger show, like, 600 type table, not a small show at all, but that it is much more focused around the cards and the collectors, like these other card shows traditionally are. So I do know that the cost is significantly less for tables and things like that. So I think we got to wait and see. I think that there's going to be these Fanatics Fests that are like blow it out of the water. Probably LA, I'm assuming, is going to be the same type. And then you'll have these other shows throughout the year that are going to be more collector, dealer, vendor focused. And those are the ones I think we can compare sort of apples to apples.
I love this. If this was around the horn, I would just be pressing the point thing. All of you would be getting points, but I really like the way you said that, Zach, because that's, again, I'm going to try not to interject my own opinion, but I really, what you said makes a lot of sense. Kind of like wait and see for Orlando. Did someone want to say something?
I'm going to Orlando, and I totally agree. I know the cost is a lot less. I'm doing half of the weekend because I know it's the same weekend as Dallas, which is very interesting play. That's probably gonna be another topic towards the end of this podcast, like possibly too many shows going on overlapping same weeks. Maybe that's a reason for the smaller crowds. But yeah, I do agree with Orlando. Definitely, I think it's going to be a solid show. And probably not as good as the New York one, but for getting deals done for like flippers and even collectors buying their PC cards, like I think it's going to be a really good show.
Yeah, I would say one thing in response to what Zach mentioned. I think the closest comparison that we're going to see from what Fanatics has put out or is going to put out for events versus some of the other similar comparable shows in the space is going to be the first weekend of November, where you have Fanatics in Orlando, which is more of a true card show, versus Fanatics in New York, which was like a collector's experience with all these different things going on. I think having simply a true card show for Fanatics versus going up something that's been a staple over the last 3+ years in Dallas. I think that, Dallas was the only large scale show. Like, I used to live in Dallas. I remember going to Dallas when Dallas was at a small Hilton Garden Inn, 40+ tables. So Dallas is the only large scale show that was operating solely throughout the pandemic.
Yeah.
So like, they were the only operable large scale show throughout the pandemic. So those two shows going against each other that weekend is going to be a real true picture in terms of how Fanatics shows, how you can really
How to
benchmark them.
compete. I also think it's going to be a very good comparison because, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, are you attending both shows? Are you going to Orlando and Dallas or just one?
So Gavin puts me on the spot.
I know I'm doing both. I'm going Thursday and Friday.
So I currently have tables for both shows. I've always had a table in the front of Dallas. And then I have 2 tables for Fanatics. I haven't figured out if I'm going to split time at each, if I'm going to go with myself to one and then have someone, tied to me to go to another and operate business for me. I haven't really figured out which route I'm going to go yet, but I'll probably figure out that plan very shortly. But I will have presence probably at both shows.
That's awesome. It's good to hear.
So, Denny, I don't want to like jump ahead of questions or things like that.
Please, no, this is great.
While we're on these topics, there's a couple things that sort of come up to mind. So one is about Dallas. Like, I agree with you. When I first started getting back in the hobby, 2020, like everybody else did, right? Like, that was the only show, to Rob's point, and it's a great show. My only concern with Dallas, first of all, props to Kyle and the whole team over there, right? They've done amazing things with that show, and it is for sure one of those staple sort of bloodline pulse of the hobby shows, right? There's tons of deals going on there. It's where, a lot of repackers, a lot of deals. People are going there to make deals, not to just walk around and look and get the experience necessarily. But, with that show being every 2 months, I sort of wonder if, that's overkill and dilutes it a little bit. But at the same time, Fanatics is starting to, push out shows on a much more regular basis. So that's why that'll be interesting to see. And I'm just sort of curious how that all plays out. But the other thing it brings up is sort of this, are there too many shows, competitions between shows? I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of these dealers and also show promoters. And it's been interesting to me to find out, because I'm not a part of that world. I enjoy attending them and supporting everybody. But, a lot of these guys, depending upon the venues, can't pick and choose their dates and stuff, right? So it's sort of like, I want this venue, and the venue dictates, hey, here's the dates you can pick from. And then you sort of take what you get. And so I think that was just interesting to me, because when I started learning more about that, I had never thought about it. I'm like, why aren't these guys like cooperating? Well, if Fanatics wants to go to Orlando and they say, this is the date you got, like, that's the date they're going to take. So I do think that I'm hopeful there's more synergy in the future. But at the same time, I think that it's not always these promoters picking and choosing to go up against each other. It's just sort of how the cards may fall.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it's exactly a competition. I mean, it is in a way, but I don't think the promoters exactly want to compete with each other. I think it's just what a lot of these shows happen in the convention centers, hotel ballrooms, stuff like that. And these convention centers and hotel ballrooms, they give each other the dates, and that's the dates. Like, they can't really switch them around. But I do think there is. I don't say there's too much shows going on exactly, because I think it is good to have a big show every weekend. I think that's good. But you also got to consider, like, people are traveling, flying to most of these shows every weekend. Like, are people going to really want to fly for 52 weeks, 50 weeks out of the year? Like, not a lot of people want to do that. Even the full timers, they don't want to do that. I know I don't. You guys probably don't either. Every weekend, it gets to be a hassle and price consuming, time consuming, all of the above. And if you notice some of the big shows like Burbank and like the nationals once a year, like the shows that are only like 1 to 4 times a year, 1 to 3 times a year, those are the better shows. The shows that are happening every month locally and regionally, the really big ones, 400 plus tables, like the ones that happen every 2 3 months, like they do begin to die out. And like Dallas, that was my first Dallas show I went to actually recently in September. I'm not a regular like Rob and Zach for Dallas, and people told me like out of the last 7 Dallas shows, this was the slowest and weakest one. And I still thought it was a great show, even being the weakest one out of the 7, apparently, according to multiple of my clients and peers. But it's just something to think about. Maybe there is too much shows going on. Like I do agree with that. What do you guys think? What do you
Please
think,
go
Zach?
ahead. I love this. I'm learning. I just want to take a back seat. Go ahead.
You want me to go, Zach, or you?
Yeah, no, go ahead, Rob, please.
I really think it comes down to being realistic. And like a lot of the promoters across the country aren't finding ways, like you mentioned, to work together. And they're instead of working together and aligning things that would be that would be beneficial to the dealers. And essentially the dealers are their clients. Like, and this is no knock on the attendees. Attendees don't walk through the door, dealers aren't happy, right? But if the dealers aren't happy in general because of overlap or because of slow attendance, that falls on the promoter. And the promoters, like, you want them to be successful, but their success relies upon the dealers and the attendees, right? So I think all of these different shows that are basically where promoters are like getting into a grudge match against each other, trying to show we're the better show, or we're getting the better dealers, or we're getting the better more attendees, or this or that. I think I think it hurts the dealers in turn, right? Like essentially being like, oh, we're gonna you know we're gonna show that we're the better show. It's like, well, you know, long term, I don't think that's like pushing people around. In my opinion, has never been like, I feel like, the right solution. I've always felt like everyone's got their spot in the space, and there's room for everybody. And I think that like having overlap, sometimes it's coincidental, but I think definitely even the dealers can tell when it's done on purpose. And um, I think that in general, with the amount of shows there are, people are being, as dealers, much more selective in terms of what shows they're going to, how many shows they're going to, what shows they're going to based off of convenience or expenses or other factors, or shows just aligning, right? Like you have one show that's in Texas, and then you can get to Florida. You leave Texas on Monday, and then you need to be in Florida Thursday. Maybe you kill a few days in between and just go right over to Florida versus going all the way home if you're based in the Midwest or the Northeast, right? So, aligning their schedules so that it's more of a seamless transition between shows. But I think in general, like, there have been a lot of shows. I mean, for me personally, like, I think the larger scale shows are easier for me to sell at, and then the more regional shows are easier for me to buy at from what I've experienced. The larger scale shows, the issue is, once you get past Thursday or Friday afternoon, a lot of the good inventory that's been at fair, realistic pricing is pretty much gone, unless you maybe get some walk-ups to your booth. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, like, let's just say how it is, right? Like, with the amount of scooping up of cars through repacking and other factors throughout the space, like, dealers can't, like, I try to be at under market in terms of cards at my booth, right? So if a card does $1,000, if I sell it at 950 and then I incorporate my show expenses on a large scale show and my time and expense were affiliated with that, like, you really can't be competitive offering with some of the other repackers or the other players in the space that are offering 90% plus on everything. So it's like, I think the thing is, right, like, having a lot of shows is beneficial at all different sizes, whether it's at the local, regional, or national, large scale level. I think the thing is, right, like, having a lot of shows is beneficial, but it's also can be a little bit detrimental in terms of, dealers thinking they have to be at shows every single week and be on a plane every single week, because those expenses add up too, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number of shows, right, and the quality of the foot traffic is going to be a huge factor. But I also think it's interesting because it's going to bring in another level of competition for these promoters. Is how do the vendors feel, right? Like to your point, Rob, like you guys are the bloodline for them, and the customers are the bloodline for everybody, and it's this whole hobby ecosystem. And I was actually talking with, Ralph Prism God a couple weeks ago on my podcast, and we were talking about the show ecosystem too that doesn't get talked about, which is also support from the local shops of these shows, right? Because you're attracting new customers potentially by having a show. Those customers show up, like maybe you get exposed to cards in general or collectibles in general, and then you make new customers for those local shops that are the day-to-day or week-to-week touch point, for those people. But I do think that the more these shows are, it's gonna make these promoters like have to step up their game and maybe not like, give like some crazy sort of incentive for you guys, but to take care of you guys, right? And to listen to you and give you things what you need. Like, again, I can only speak for my local show, but John Scanlon, who runs the Denver Card Show, he's done a really good job of growing the show, but the venue that he had it for a while, unfortunately was shutting down. And so he had to go find a new venue. Well, that venue has access to restaurants. It's got, really nice, like newer hotel venue. But he's doing things like offering 2 free lunches to the vendors, right? Which isn't like a big thing, but like that's a nice touch. Hey, you want to be there all day? I don't have to worry about bringing food. Like that's awesome. So it's like, hey, the quality of the venue, is there carpeting? Is there, good lighting? Like these are all things that are going to factor into that vendor experience. And I think, I don't doubt that Fanatics won't do that, right? Like I know that that's where one of their focuses are, is to really elevate the entire show experience, both for the customer being the end consumer as well as the vendors. But I think we're going to need to see that more and more. Or like you said, Rob, like, and Gavin, right? You're going to pick and choose these things where you're going and be like, hey, A, they don't attract as much people. B, they sort of give me my table and they're like, here you go, like best of luck. Yeah. They're going to have to step up their game too, which will be interesting to see over the next, 12, 24 months.
Gavin, before you say, I just want to say one thing to Zach, and I'm sorry about that. Before I lose track of it. No, Zach, like that's the one thing that I really appreciated, even at the large scale level, like something like the Fanatics show. One difference maker that I really saw, it's like an intangible. It doesn't cost any money to do. It's like EJ is probably dealing with thousands and thousands and thousands of people. He's DMing me within a couple hours and responding to me, when some of these other show promoters, like I can't get an email back within 3 replies. Like, and I'm giving time for them to respond at their own convenience. And like, listen, like I understand everyone's busy, right? But like as a show promoter, like the vendors have to understand, like, hey, how do I plan everything 2 or 3 months out so I can get affordable flights, so I can get a hotel, so I can get everything organized. And I think the thing is, like right now, it's end of September. I'm looking at shows for the rest of the year right now. Like I'm planning even maybe into the start of 25. So it's like the thing is, those intangibles that, EJ was like accessible, or at the beginning of the show, just having Rubin stop by and saying hello to each of the dealers at each of their tables and saying, hey, like, hope you have a good show, that like makes that like personableness, like, even though it's like a large scale corporation, it makes you feel like a little bit more genuine about, and not just that, right? Like I talked about, right? Let's break it down. And like, I'll be quick, Denny. I don't want to take a long time. Let's break it down. If I have a 10 showcase booth and it costs me 3,600, and then it costs me $1,200 for a hotel for 3 nights, and it costs me in Manhattan, and then it costs me another, let's say it's Manhattan. Let's say it costs you $200 a day for food, which I think is conservative considering the prices in New York and what you got to buy at the show, and breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and coffee. And let's just say it costs you you're probably looking at $6,000 in expenses to do a show like that.
Your flight's probably between $200 and $400.
And that's not even incorporating airfare, right? Like I'm in Connecticut.
Ubers.
Yeah. So let's break it down, right? If I'm selling cards, and let's say I even bought them at 80 80 to 85 and I'm selling them at 90 to 95 to be competitive at my booth, that's a 10% spread. I have to sell $60,000 worth of cards just to break even.
Just to break even. Yeah.
So like that's what
20
I'm
to
trying to say.
100,000.
Like that's what I'm trying to say. Like if you're operating on a 10% spread from what your acquisition to sale price is, once you incorporate your expense for that booth, you have to basically sell $60,000 worth of cards just to break even on that 10% spread. So that's why I try to tell people it's like you have to pick and choose where your high cost shows are because you can't do every single one of them. You can't. Like for me, it's normally the high cost shows are the National, Fanatics, and probably Burbank just because of the flights. I mean, Dallas, I normally can book out. The hotels are pretty affordable. The show I'm locked in. I've been there for a long time, but those are normally my three highest cost shows of the year: Dallas or Fanatics, National, and Burbank. But you can't do every single one. That's just what it comes down to at the end of the day. You can try to, but from my perspective, it's too overbearing for sure on the financial side.
Yeah. Speaking of the financial side, like I'll get to one of Zach's points before. He's saying like a lot of the promoters are trying to offer incentives or wish to offer incentives. I feel like one thing the promoters are doing wrong, which some of them I understand their points of raising table prices. I've noticed a big spike in table prices between the four main promoters I deal with, but between JP's, the Philly show raised their prices, and Dallas I'd imagine probably raised their prices in the past couple of years. I'd imagine. Like they all have, and I think some of them I understand the venues raise their prices, so you got to raise your prices to keep the profit margins. But I feel like a couple of these promoters, I'm not saying which ones, as I don't know which ones, but I'm sure some of them just want to put more money in their pockets, and I think it's not really fair to the dealers. Which going back to Rob's point, like he's cool that EJ like is fair and talks to everybody. Like a lot of promoters aren't like that, which that's a big deal for the Fanatic show. I think that the promoters are so willing to speak to the dealers and prioritize the dealers as most promoters don't. I think that's a big thing in the hobby right now, which we need more. I don't want to say nice promoters. All the promoters are nice for the most part. The promoters need to talk more to the dealers, I think, and be more interactive. I think that's a big thing. What do you guys think about like the whole thing?
I just can speak to, I know for a fact that there's a reason EJ's at Fanatics, right? The guy is a rock star. I mean, he is the cream of the crop. Not to say that these other guys aren't awesome, but he cares. He's been a collector. He's been on all sides of it. So he understands. And, from what I heard too, which was really interesting to your point, Gavin, is that, EJ was going around. Some of the other people that were a part of the Fanatics team at Fanatics Fest were going around to those vendors and saying, hey, what worked? What didn't? How can we be better? And I think that to your guys' point, like we need more of that, right? Like these promoters need to pay attention to the vendors and listen. And, if they're going to charge more, okay, like you said, there's increasing prices of a venue, there's whatever it might be, but put some of that back into the show. Make sure that there's the foot traffic there. Spend that on some different type of local advertising to make sure that you as a vendor feel that value, that you're putting out your time, money, effort, energy to be there. Make sure that there's people there to then look at your showcases and, cover your costs. And I think, Rob, I really appreciate that you're willing to, share some of those numbers and stuff, because I think that'll catch some of the audience off guard. I don't think people realize that. I think they walk around, they say, oh, this guy's got, $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 cards. Like he's rich and, this is so easy. And it's like, to your point, you're like, well, yeah, they're big cards, but like you might sell the $10,000 card. You maybe have $1,000 profit into it. And then when you back everything else out, like it's not that big of a nut when it's all said and done. And I think people just see the big numbers and then assume that there's a ton of money, there to have on each card. So I think that's a really interesting perspective you brought up.
Yeah, me and Rob do a very similar thing too. Like we're both pay 80 to 85, sell at like 90 to 95. We're both in the same 10% margin. So, and I deal with less money than him at the moment. So like, I definitely understand where he's coming from. Like we need to, guys like me and Rob, even you, Zach, if you do some flipping here and there, and Denny, you too, like we need to sell like 40 to 50K in inventory just to like make a couple thousand on the weekend. Cause really that 40 to 50K is really only like 4,000 in profit there. So it's like you spend 1,000 or two on expenses. It's like, it leaves you with not a lot of money. Like I tell people all the time, like, oh, I made this, I made that, but like, and they think like I'm doing great, but like in reality, it's like I made $1,200 this month. Like I didn't make, 80 grand as I did in revenue. Like people have to start taking that into consideration.
I think that's always been a fault in the space. Like everyone looks at like, oh, I made this big sale, but like, what was your actual like return on investment, right? Like after you incorporate your expenses of acquiring and selling that card, right? So it's not just the sale of it, right? Like you have to incorporate, okay, like did you set up at another show just to acquire those cards too? Like people don't think that. Like what did it take to acquire that card and what did it take to sell it? If you had to do two different shows to do that, like it's not just the sale of that card at a show, it's also the acquisition of it. So I think like people are sometimes a little bit short-sighted in looking at the true time and cost associated with acquiring and selling items. And I think that they sell a card for $10,000 and they're into it for 8 grand and they sell it that, a $10,000 card and they sell it for 9,300 at 93%. Their spread's 1,300, but what were the costs and time affiliated with those two shows where they acquired it and they sold it, right? And how long did it take to sell it, right? Like, time value of money. Like it's a traditional thing. It's like, I think it's no knock on anyone. But I think, and you guys have probably heard of this already, but something that I've heard recently is some of the repackers took 3-4 weeks off from buying, and I think that is actually good from a dealer perspective, because if you think about it, I think what they're going to do is, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong if you've heard otherwise, I think what they're going to do is bring the price points in terms they're willing to buy it at a percentage wise back down to a more realistic standard, which will in turn require dealers or flippers to pay. Let's say the repackers say we're going to pay 5% less. Then the dealers or the investors, the flippers, are going to pay 5% less across the board, which is actually in turn more beneficial to me as a dealer because I can still acquire inventory at more realistic pricing and give my retail customers at a show as a vendor more realistic pricing. Like
Also
for
less
me,
risk.
yes, but I mean for me, like how am I supposed to pay 88 to 90 and still give someone a price that's under market once I incorporate my cost? Like it just, as a dealer, it doesn't work unless I'm just going in there buying a $10 admission ticket and walking out the door after one day. Like that, as a dealer, for a weekend dealer with flights, hotels, everything, it doesn't add up when you pay 88 to 90 and then you still want to sell under market. The spread isn't there. But if I can pay 80 and sell at 93 to 95, and I can still give someone a price that's a retail walk-up customer under market, it's more realistic. It's the current, in my opinion, the current price points for dealers acquiring inventory in terms of what they used to be able to get versus what they can get now at realistic pricing to resell at a fair price, it's not sustainable, in my opinion. I think with the costs involved and the time involved and the travel and all the factors into account, in my opinion, the rates that dealers have had to pay for inventory because of the repacking and other factors to be able to sell at a competitive price to their end consumer, it's not sustainable long term. That's just my opinion. Everyone has a different perspective. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are.
I think it's great points, Rob. Like, the big thing too is the repacks in general, right? Like there's a lot of talk about how sustainable that is, period, right? Like, if these guys are going and people keep putting money in and don't get those hits and they're sort of losing, like how long does that last, right? And I know that right now the repackers are a huge part of the hobby ecosystem, right? They're supporting a lot of these vendors and they're supporting a lot of the liquidity because they're able to come in and buy a lot of inventory and then in turn move it, on their live streams or wherever else those are being sold. But I think to your point too, like, and this isn't anything new, right? It's been talked about for multiple years now recently, but if everybody keeps saying, I want to buy undercomps, and granted, there's a place for all of this. At what point is it just driving the value of everything down, right? Like at some point, someone, these collectors, right? Like I'm a 90s guy. I'm an MJ Pippin Rodman guy. Like I have no problem paying over comps for some cards because I love them. I'm going to keep them and it's okay. Like I don't need to like win the deal. I want that card. And so that's what's interesting to me is, with Fanatics' goal of trying to grow the hobby, 10x the hobby, all this stuff, like how many actual collectors are going to be coming in where they're willing to say, hey, okay, the comps are $50 on this card. I'll pay you 60 because I just want it, right? Like those people do exist. I just hope that becomes more, because I think that's going to help grow the pie for everybody. And I get there's a time and a place, and everybody needs to have their margins to make their money. But again, I'm just curious to see sort of how this evolution happens, as these things sort of, A, repackers around more, and B, more people come into the hobby. What types of people are they able to attract? That I think that's going to be real interesting.
Yeah, I think there's more people in the hobby that buy. I'm not exactly, I want to say overcounts, but they do collect than we think. Because like we're all flippers here, and we're all collectors as well. But from a fluke standpoint, like everybody wants to pay the 85, 80, 90, some people as low as 70%. Like people want their things at numbers. Like I personalize in Giants cards. A lot of New York Giants cards. I sell a lot of Eli Mannings, Daniel Jones, all the Giants guys, modern, old, a lot of guys from the Hall of Fame teams, of course, 86, 90, 07, 11. Like the teams are there, I sell a lot of. But I sell to a lot of collectors exactly for that stuff, and they pay me over the comp, or if I buy a card on eBay for, let's say, $50, they'll give me $75 for it. I'll make my $10 after shipping, because they want it, they collect it, they're going to keep it for years. And then going back to what Rob was saying with the people that like the flippers, like it's hard to set up because we're running on a 10% margin. We pay so much in costs. Like even the people that pay the $15 admission, like chances are they are flying out, or $10 admission, whatever it is, even if it's free, like people are still paying for the flights, the Ubers, the hotels, the food. Like they still have a lot of expenses. Like I didn't even set up at the National, but I was there for 4 days, and all my expenses were well over $1,000, and I didn't even set up. So even from a walker's standpoint, it still gets costly. Like I set up at 50% of the shows I do, I'd say 40 to 50% of them I do set up at. But even from walking, it's still almost just as much costly for me personally. I don't know about you guys.
Well, it depends. So, like Gavin, the people that have been doing what I mentioned have gotten a lot more strategic in what they do. So they fly out for the first day, maybe spend one night at the hotel versus three, and then they either fly out same day or next day. So let's say it's Dallas, right? They may fly out Thursday morning to be the first ones in the room and maybe pay for a hotel for one night, right? And then they fly out Friday afternoon. So they're going there, they're paying one night in a hotel, paying a couple general admission tickets and one flight. Like versus a dealer paying 4 nights in a hotel, paying for a vendor booth, paying for all the other like the thing is, like if you break the breakdown in costs, it's probably under half, right? So like that's the thing,
Yeah.
like they have gotten a lot more strategic. If you look at any of the flippers that are buying in mass volume, they are not usually at shows on Sundays. The latest you see them at a show is Saturday afternoon, maybe. They usually fly back latest Saturday night, sometimes even Friday night. So the thing is, once these rooms have been picked through, what happens with the rest of the weekend at the show, right? So it's no knock on anyone. I think there's different areas where everyone can succeed in the space. I just think that the current model is not sustainable long term. And like Zach mentioned, now we're so price focused on, hey, this is the comp, I want to be here, versus 3 or 4 years ago, you saw a card at a fair price. You had FOMO, you had fear of missing out. If your card was a Zion Prism and you could get it at comp, you're like, it's only going to go up. Right. So that's the thing. Like, I think the challenge is now is that everyone's so price fixated and they're like, well, I can just have someone that pays me stronger. Like, I
That's
feel
the
like
big
that's not the demeanor. I feel like that's not the demeanor that should be happening across the board. I think I'm a firm believer that deals can be fair for both sides, whichever side of the table you're on. And I think that everyone can kind of find ways to eat and put some money in their pocket.
course.
But I think this level of extremes it's kind of been at recently, I think it's not sustainable long term. I think in general, like people thinking I need to win and you need to lose mentality isn't going to
That's
be
not a good
fair.
mentality yet, though.
That I think just long term that won't be sustainable, needs to go away. I think that there's a level of greed, I think, over the last year or two in the space that wasn't there 3 or 4 years ago. I think
People are
3 or
thinking
4 years
more.
ago, I think it was more of like you saw a card, it was priced fairly. you have a good relationship with the dealer, you're going to buy it.
All right. Gentlemen, do you know how hard it is for me to not talk? I have been learning so much. So we have 5 minutes left, and I want to kind of talk a little bit here, and then we'll get us out. I think this just means we need to have another stream and maybe call it like part 2 next week, because I really want to have the three of you. Like, this has been fantastic, and I truly believe the audience is going to really enjoy this as well. Not to put you guys, not to give you guys too much pressure, but I know for a fact that Fanatics does listen to not just my podcast. They consume, right? And it's not the corporation, it's people within the corporation, whether it's an intern or whether it's an employee. They probably have like the lowest level employee listening to my podcast, but they're listening. They have their eyes and ears. Yeah, they have their eyes and ears everywhere within the hobby, and then they report up the chain, right? So but again, whether you're the lowest level employee or EJ or Michael Rubin, like Rob, you're not an industry plan as far as I know, but you're telling us what I knew too, which is he's walking around, even it's a brief hello. Again, this man is worth billions or whatever, and he's going around making sure everyone feels welcome and that, good luck, have a good show. And it's about the people, right? I mean, yes, people can rail against the corporation of Fanatics, and I'm not here to like um glaze a corporation, but at the end, it's about people and making them feel wanted and appreciated. And so, I just wanted to kind of say that, because that goes a long way. It really does. So but yeah, when Zach was talking about food, like, oh, they're gonna provide lunch, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm the hungriest man in the hobby. I'm salivating. I'm like, I want to know what they're gonna eat. So you're gonna have to report back as to what is provided for lunch. Yeah, is it pizza or is it gonna be like subs? I'll eat either one. But yeah, promoters, some of them have marketing budgets, some of them don't. I think it's really interesting that you have these depending on how big show, like I think a lot of people just go, oh, you just multiply the cost per table and the number of tables and that's how much they make. Well, you have the venue cost, some shows, depending on your locality, there's insurance. Yeah, I was just about to get to that. And there's security. I definitely saw security guards, off-duty police officers, whatever you want to call them, at Culture Collision. And there's also undercover cops, and this is really important because the Big Theft at Dallas show got a lot of notice, but even in my local show there was like a scammer going around, right? So if you're able to immediately notify someone to file a claim or do something like that, you can do that right then and there. So I think that's really important. So having said all of that, promoters spend money on ambassadors like me. No, I'm just kidding. I'm half kidding. I love going to these shows, but yeah, it's not just a cost standpoint. It's the time. It's the time away from family. It's time away from your loved ones, time away from your pets and all that. So, I just wanted to kind of say that as well. This is just a flood of things I just had in my notes of, once I get a chance to kind of interject, I want to kind of say things. But yes, one last thing I'll say before I get us all out here. I think that competition is good. It's going to be good for the consumer. I think it's good that we have these promoters who want to, in a way, one up each other. But I think the competition has to be healthy and not, egos coming into play and trying to one up each other in a malicious way, but more of like competition in order to improve the space for the vendors, for the public, and not just lining their own pockets, but more of like, let's do something, let's put on a good show, let's put things up there that bring people in, that generate the enthusiasm for shows. Because we didn't get to this, but the burnout, is that a real thing? So next time, give you a little preview, not just you guys but the audience. I definitely want to have the three of you on. I want to talk about which shows, because we didn't do a lot of compare and contrast, but which shows had the most showcase hits, downtown's kabooms, because I feel like that's the language of card shows right now. Which shows had the most vintage, what have you liked about these shows, kind of like a compare and contrast. Definitely I want to talk about burnout next time. I want to talk about how you guys feel when someone comes up to you at a show and starts just immediately, they don't even say hello, just what's your best. And then it's funny, even if they have a sticker price on the card, what's your best? It's like, buddy, there's a sticker price on that card. Let's talk.
We already have the perfect response about that.
What is it?
You see the
what's
price.
the highest?
You see my price. I'm not going to negotiate against myself.
Ah,
Yeah,
not gonna.
that's
Yes, I love that. Not gonna go.
that's a good
So let's
one.
definitely talk about that next time as well. How important is it to consider doing part cash, part trade deals? Because I gotta say, I talked about this in my solo, but Gavin, like at East Coast National, there were some dealers who were like wouldn't even consider looking at your cards, and it's okay if you don't want to buy the
Mhm.
cards, but keep someone at the table, right? Have the
Yeah, I
conversation.
always do because like I'm always. I mean, all of us here are always active buyers. I mean, at a
Exactly.
certain number, I'd buy anything. It's just how it is.
Right.
Like, so we always have
Um,
stuff, especially the
And
beginning.
yeah, and then the other thing I want to talk about is selling to friends. Again, you guys are kind of friendly and like how it's I always find that kind of like a hard thing to navigate is like, the buddy discount and all this stuff. But yeah, the future streams I want to play around this layout because I didn't realize, Zach, you were at the top right corner and you have like the Card Diary logo where, Gavin's on his phone. So if he's on portrait mode, I should just put him up there so that there's less, blank space. So these are things that I'm going to learn. I didn't know about this whole like solo spotlight thing. Again,
Yeah,
I've never
Rob
had more than one person on. So as you guys do your goodbyes, I'm going to try to do the solo spotlight. The last thing I'll say, I guess, is good luck to each of you at your shows. I know that like Zach, you said you're going to do Denver, and Rob and Gavin. I believe you guys are going to what is it called?
one of
Well,
Mohegan this weekend.
yeah. So Mohegan, yeah, and it's not to play cards, or I guess you're playing with cards, but like not poker cards. But yeah, let's get you out on that. I'm gonna put a spotlight on each of you as you say your goodbyes. What are you doing this weekend? What are you doing in the hobby in general? Kind of, just this is your 1 or 2 minutes to just kind of say your farewells. Only for now because we're running this back next week. So I'll
Sure.
start with let's go Gavin, Rob, then Zach. So Gavin, you have the floor.
Yeah, so thanks again, Denny, for having me. It's much appreciated. I was really happy to be here. It was a pleasure meeting Zach, a really nice guy. Hope to see him again and hopefully maybe be on one of his podcasts one day. As always, Denny and Rob was nice catching up with you guys. In the beginning, I don't think I said my Instagram handle. It is 63 on sports cards. I did forget about that. So if you want to give me a follow or DM or anything, any questions or maybe perhaps strike a deal, always down. I'm on Instagram every day. Yeah, I think we covered a lot, but we definitely have more topics to cover, as Denny was saying. A lot more topics. We could definitely have a part two, maybe even a part three to this within the next week or two or whatever. I'm always available. I'm sure I know we all have busy schedules, but I'm sure we'll figure it out again. Yeah, me and Rob are doing Mohegan this weekend. October we had just shows off the top of my head that I know I'll be setting up at all three, I believe. I got Chantilly in Virginia, Hofstra University on Long Island. That's pretty big. All these shows are 300 plus tables, by the way, and then the Orlando Dallas show that we were talking about briefly in the beginning. So yeah, that's my upcoming schedule for October. And again, Denny, I really appreciate you having me, and thank you again.
Thanks,
Awesome. Thank you
Gavin.
so much. And yeah, you guys are not setting up together. You guys will be at the show, separate tables, but
Yeah.
you guys will be there. So yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, so Robert Coots, Collector's Choice Cards, Robert Harold on Facebook. Yeah, no, Gavin and I will both be at the same show this weekend in Connecticut. Nice show that's steadily growing and becoming kind of a staple in the Northeast region. It's East Coast Collectibles Convention, EC3Con on EC3Con on Instagram. My buddy Scott DeMay is the promoter of that show, so he's been in the space for a long time. Him and I known each other. He's a Connecticut guy like myself. We've known each other for a long time. So I'm doing that this weekend. And then October, it's looking maybe like a couple regional shows, as well as some of the larger scale shows, such as maybe a Nashville, Chantilly. I'll definitely be at potentially the Hofstra show in Long Island, like Gavin mentioned, and then either Dallas or Fanatics, probably, or a mixture of both. So those are the shows that are coming up on my circuit. And I think that, like we kind of talked about before, like I think Fanatics Fest kind of served as like one quick note. I think Fanatics Fest kind of served as kind of a wake up call for some of the shows, some of the promoters. I think kind of the impression that they made is that each of the shows kind of needs to step up their game. And I don't think they're going to be at the same cost level or the same, blowout experience that Fanatics was. But I think that it basically set the standard that, hey, we're here, we're going to be relevant. Like, you guys need to make your shows a little bit more, invest a little bit more time and effort into your shows so that people feel the same type of, happiness and excitement moving forward. So I think it was a good wake up call, I think, for the space for sure. But in general, thank you for having me. Zach, was a pleasure meeting you. Looking forward to maybe furthering some conversations. I know I'd be glad to share with some of the people in the space some of your services that you're offering. So I'd be love to hear more about that. And Gavin, a pleasure as always. And Denny, nice seeing you in Atlanta, and looking forward to furthering our conversations for sure.
Yeah, talk about a soundbite. Yeah, that's going to be clippable. What Rob just said. A lot of this, I hope to clip a lot of fun little things and publish this out and kind of get the word out. And again, like, these are you guys are real people, real deals. I know sometimes people are like, who do I trust in making deals? Like, you guys are the real deal. So hopefully you guys can, this can generate some transactions for y'all as well. So Zach, let's get us out, and then I'll just have a closing.
Yeah. So first, like you guys said, Gavin, Rob, awesome to meet you. I'm pretty convinced we've rubbed shoulders at all these shows because we definitely have crossed paths, just not formally met. So it's awesome to formally meet you guys. Denny, thank you so much for inviting me to be on. It's my pleasure. As far as upcoming, as I mentioned, Denver Card Show, October 5th, 6th, I'll be set up there. I'm actually really looking forward to it. Setting up with a friend, and we're both bringing our kids. So that's always cool to be able to use the hobby as a way to introduce, your kids to business and collectibles and all sorts of good stuff. And again, my handle is collector_creative. You can find me also at collectorcreative.com. I do have my podcast, Hobby Hustle. So if you guys, like I said, search YouTube or any of the major podcast platforms, it'll pop up. And I do have some original card art that I've been putting out. So just had a drop on Monday. Hip Hop is Tupac card. It's been doing really well. I've got another drop coming up next Monday as well. So if you guys are into that at all, please go check it out. And I'd love, to always interact with you guys. So if you have questions, issues, concerns, please feel free to hit me up on any of the social media platforms. IG's my main one, but happy to answer questions, be there. And it's just a pleasure, guys. And hopefully we'll do this again sometime soon.
Awesome. And I don't want to end on a sour note, but you're kind of promoting yourself and your brands and your platforms. This is when you're supposed to do it. Like, you're supposed to do it in a podcast. Instagram, you're promoting yourself. You are talking about your cards, your collections, your business. Like, that's when you're supposed to do it. The reason I bring that up is someone was in my comments, and I won't say who it was, but it happened just before this podcast started recording. But they were like, you promote yourself and your brand so much, and I'm like, yes, that is social media. We're like, people, I'm not flexing really expensive cards, but you are showing the world what you have from a tangible standpoint, or knowledge, or education, or lessons, or just kind of like your life journey. But it was funny because this person was promoting their brand or their show in the comment section of my post, and I'm like, I don't mind that if that wasn't the only time you commented, right? It's like, put in, fire emojis, or, hey, I like what you're doing, or this, that. But the only time this person was commenting on my post was to promote their shop or their show or their brand. And I'm like, again, if that's the only thing you're doing in my own posts, like, that just doesn't seem kosher. But anyway, I'm still trying to navigate social media myself. I'm trying to figure out.
Denny, I see where you're
Yeah.
coming from. I'm a firm believer that business relationships are a two-way street. And I think now, especially as a singles dealer who's buying and selling and trading singles, like, you run into experiences where, you're always fair on one side of the relationship, and then the other side never reciprocates, even when it's a fraction of, what you've done for them.
Yeah.
So, like, that's the thing, right? It's like, you scratch my back, I scratch your, like, it's like that old mentality where it's like, things work both ways, should work both for both sides. Like, that needs to definitely be recognized in the space. And I think that the longer term dealers or the longer term investors or collectors see that a lot more than the people that are a little bit more short-sighted, for sure.
Yeah, we definitely have to talk about that more. Kind of going back to the whole, like, dealing with friends and all that. It's something I'm trying to do better with, is, not trying to extract every penny out of a transaction. I mean, there's so many things that, I give away. I'll do discounts. I'll do all sorts of stuff, but something we should definitely talk about more, because one, you want to maintain your business, right? Because like Rob, it's your full-time gig, but also not being so, like, kind of like some of these people are just so, I feel like, so short-sighted. They only want to win a deal, but
They're like cutthroat.
so cutthroat. Oh my goodness. So,
Wow.
gentlemen, this was an absolute pleasure. I am so hungry. I gotta go eat. But you guys have a wonderful rest of your week. I'm gonna coordinate with you guys offline about how to set up this next one, but there definitely has to be a part 2. So you guys be well, and thank you again for your time and for your knowledge.
Thank you for having us, Denny.
Guys, really
Thanks, guys.
appreciate it.
Be well.
All right, go on, guys.
Take care, guys.